That's the question. I'm going to give you a summary of the case, and Dr. Klipp has asked me to leave as much time as possible for the questions at the end, so I'm going to be moving through it fairly quickly. But if you've all seen the Netflix series, then you have a general idea of what's going on, right? Okay, let's see whether that question even has any meaning. I would suggest not. Where did all of this happen? It happened in Virginia, and that's important. Virginia is one of the original 13 colonies that broke away from Great Britain. And during the American Civil War, Virginia was the leader of the Confederate states that wanted to keep slavery. That's what the Confederate War is essentially about, also states' rights. But that affects Virginia history to this day, and it affects especially the criminal justice system. In the north of Virginia, it's very urban, very progressive. That's a suburb of Washington, D.C. And in the center of Virginia, it looks like that. It's very rural, a lot of farmland, and very, very conservative. So it's a state that's split, like so many U.S. states, between left-leaning urban elites and conservative rural population. That's the slogan of Virginia, which is particularly nice. All of you can perhaps get a little laugh out of that. Virginia is for lovers. Did not turn out that way for me. This story starts on April the 3rd, 1985. That's when this woman, Annie Massey, was looking for her friend, Nancy Haysom. Annie Massey was the wife of a very important local doctor. He was, I believe, the director of the local hospital in Lynchburg, Virginia. Lynchburg is a relatively small town in the rural part of Virginia. And she was basically upper class, elite in Lynchburg. And so was her friend Nancy Haysom, who was living just across the Lynchburg line in Bedford County, right? That turns out to be important. Nancy Haysom's family, the Benedict family, Nancy Benedict Haysom, was an old Virginia family, just like the Masseys were an old Virginia family. But she had left Virginia and married Derek Haysom, who's from South Africa, originally from Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and then South Africa. He worked in the steel industry. He was an executive. And he was about 20 years older than Nancy. And they lived here in Loose Chippings, just on the Bedford County side of the Lynchburg, Bedford County area. That was a retirement cottage. They'd gone into retirement because Derek was in his 70s. And it was fairly small, basically 1.5 bedrooms. There was a real bedroom downstairs, and Elizabeth, their daughter, had a small bedroom upstairs, but she didn't live there. She was at college with me at the University of Virginia. Annie Massey was looking for her friend Nancy because they were supposed to have a card game. They were bridge players, I believe. And she hadn't showed up, wasn't answering the phone. So she went to the house. She had a key because she was Nancy's best friend. And this is what she saw when she opened the door. This is the living room with Derek Haysom, who had been brutally killed. In the kitchen, she could see Nancy. In between the kitchen and the living room was the dining room, where obviously there was a lot of blood on the floor. She called Sheriff Carl Wells. He was the sheriff of Bedford County, obviously, and he took over the investigation. Bedford County, you have to think of this as Lynchburg, with I think 100,000 residents, was the big city. Bedford County was 3,500 people, right? It was very rural, very small sheriff's department, okay? He sealed off the crime scene, as you're supposed to do, and his investigators started working. In the early months, the first 1.5, 2 months, they had a regional task force because Bedford County Sheriff's Department was not able to handle a crime of this magnitude. So they had the Roanoke City Police Department and the Lynchburg City Police Department helping the Bedford County Police Department. But the leader of all of this was this man, Chuck Reed. He was the first Bedford County investigator on the crime scene, Chuck Reed. This is what he looks like today, more or less. He's lost a lot of hair since then. assisting him was Ricky Gardner, this was his first murder case. He has just become an investigator. He's basically training Ricky Gardner. This is what he looks like today, more or less. He's grown a mustache, if anybody cares. This is what they found at the scene. Working from left to right, you've got the kitchen, and I've circled there Nancy Haysom in the kitchen. Then you've got the dining room, which you saw earlier, with the table and the chairs. And then you've got the living room, and you can see Derek Haysom is lying across the door from the living room to the dining room. And to the far right, you've got the bedroom. All right? So you've got two victims lying in different rooms, separated by another room in between. Suggests more than one perpetrator. Doesn't have to be, suggests that. What you found also, one of the first things you saw when you entered this, these evidentiary items are called LR. That stands for living room. That's the first room you enter when you enter the house, okay? This is LR2, living room 2, okay? It's a shoe print, right? You can see that in blood. There was also a sock print called LR3, living room 3. There's also another sock print called LR5, which is more smeared than that one even. And that's important because Derek Haysom was wearing moccasins and Nancy Haysom was wearing hard-soled shoes. So neither the sock prints nor the sneaker print were made by their feet. And it again suggests two people. April 4th or 5th, this man shows up at the crime scene. His name is Ed Sulzbach. Has anybody here watched the TV series Criminal Minds? Over there. It's about profilers, right, with the FBI. One of the characters is based on him. He was one of the founders of the whole, if it's a science, the technique of profiling, psychological profiles. Ed Sulzbach was right in there at the very beginning. And he was there right at the very beginning of this case. Decades later, they interviewed him, and he said he performed a profile, and his results were that this crime was committed by someone close to the family and a female perpetrator. That's what it says right there. This is not the profile itself. This is an FBI document that was discovered in 2018, which would be 33 years later, referring to the profile. There's also a letter from the prosecutor's office. We did not hear about this. The defense did not hear about this profile until 2011 through that TV series on CBS, one of the American networks. This was suppressed from the trial to that series, 21 years. It's that movie where the interview with the profiler was shown. We did not know this until then. Any lawyers here? Future lawyers? Yep, okay. They've got a U.S. Supreme Court precedent called Brady versus Maryland, which says that the prosecution is supposed to turn over exculpatory evidence and information. Profiles are not evidence, but they are information. That profile, as exculpatory information, should have been turned over to the defense. It was not. Ed Sulzbach, in this interview, said that going beyond the profile itself, he said in this interview, I settled on the daughter, which would be Elizabeth Haysom, right there. That's not part of his profile, that's his personal opinion. Would have been nice to know that before my trial. On April 6th, based on this, for the first time, they interrogate Elizabeth Haysom. There she is. She was a university student living in Charlottesville with me, 1 hour away from Lynchburg. Usually, the Haysom residence is referred to as being in Lynchburg, although legally it was in Bedford County, because it was a suburb of Lynchburg just across the county line. The first thing she did in her very first interview is throw the blame on another woman. Her name has now come out. It was blackened there. I'll say her first name. Her first name is Mary. And here at my trial, she admits that she threw Mary under the bus. And they investigated Mary very hard. That's a letter from the prosecutor to her lawyer that put a lot of pressure on her. She, in turn, of course, also accused Elizabeth. So this seemed to confirm the FBI profile. The FBI profile says female perpetrator, and immediately you've got two women accusing each other. Elizabeth Haysom and Mary. April 8th, somebody actually does real police work and finds out what size is this shoe print, right? Which is clear, it's not smeared. You can actually measure this. Turns out it's size 8 to 8.5 woman's shoe or a small boy's shoe. That's Deputy Carol Baker. Carol, in that part of the state, is actually a man's name. April 16th, they interview Elizabeth again. And she says she's 8 shoe size, right? Which matches the shoe print. But of course, that can be anybody with size 8 shoes. She does not have unusually large or small feet. It's pretty standard. That could be anybody. Early June, something strange happens. The family wants to sell the house. Normal thing to do is to hire a cleaning company. Elizabeth persuaded her family that they should do it themselves. And this is not me saying it. This comes out at her trial in 1987. Her brothers say that she's the one who pushed them all to clean the house themselves, which is strange. While doing this, Annie Massey was there, and one of Elizabeth's half-brothers, Dr. Howard Haysom, was there. And they said at her sentencing hearing that they saw her remove her shoe and place her foot over that bloody sock print that y'all saw earlier. Which does not necessarily have to mean she's guilty, but it is suspicious behavior. And it made people look at her more. So, on June the 7th, what happens? Here's the sock print. A forensic report comes back. The forensic report says that this sock print corresponds to a size 6.5 to 7.5 woman's shoe, or a size 5 to 6 man's shoe. So that's very close to the shoe size she wore, which would again tend to point at her, but it's a very smeared sock print, okay? June 25th, they conduct luminol tests at the crime scene at the house. You see here there's a lot of blood in the dining room, which would make you think maybe people tracked that blood somewhere, right? And that, for example, outside when they left the crime scene. You see here the driveway and the grass. And they luminoled that area, and they found bloody shoe prints on the walkway and on the grass. Why is that interesting? Because on the night that all this happened, Elizabeth Haysom had a rental car. So she was able to get to the crime scene with this rental car. It was rented in her name. So Chuck Reed, the lead investigator, goes and does a luminol test and also takes swabs, not just the luminol test, but also takes swabs from the rental car. And both the luminol tests and the swabs taken from the car show that there's no blood in the rental car, which would tend to point away from Elizabeth Haysom, right? Her rental car should have had blood on it because there was blood on the driveway and on the grass. But there's no blood on the rental car. Maybe she isn't guilty. Sylvia Moore is the cleaning person at the car rental agency. And she testifies later that the car was returned the very next day and it was spotless. That's her expression. It's a spotless car. She didn't have to do any cleaning at all, which would again point away. That's the quote right there. It would point away from Elizabeth. The fact that a luminol test was conducted on the car was again suppressed by the prosecution. Under Brady versus Maryland, this definitely should have been turned over. And this is evidence, not just exculpatory information. We didn't hear about it until 2013, 23 years after. July 2nd, this man, that's from my trial, this man files a report. His name is Robin Young. He's a fingerprint expert. He finds Elizabeth Haysom's fingerprints on a vodka bottle in the living room. Why is this important? Because Derek Haysom has a blood alcohol content of 0.22, and so does Nancy Haysom. To give you an idea how close that is, there's Derek Haysom and LR17, right? The vodka bottle is right there. just a few feet away from Derek. Here you can see it. That's the liquor cabinet. Please note the glasses at the top. That's also relevant. Although I don't know whether that's in this speech here today. But anyway, that's where her fingerprints were found. However, Elizabeth had visited the house 1 week prior, okay? So it's at least thinkable that she left those fingerprints 1 week earlier, and she was just unlucky that they lasted for a week and were found in close proximity to her parents who were dead and had elevated blood alcohol levels. August 12, 1985, this woman, Mary Jane Burton, submits a long report with the result of blood group testing and hair analysis. Back then, they did not have DNA yet. All they had was blood groups, right? She found lots and lots of A and AB blood. Derek was A, Nancy was AB. She also found O blood, and she found B blood, I think, which you see that on the bottom screen there. So she found O blood and AB blood. The O blood was at 2 places. One of them, 4 of the spots were on the front door, right? On the screen door. See the little arrow there? That's a separate door with a mosquito netting. And there's the handle. That particular sample there, right, is called 2FE, FE standing for front entrance. And she also found B-type blood, like I just mentioned, and that was on a rag in the kitchen near Nancy Haysom. You can actually see it here. It's hanging on the washing machine in front, right? And that's suggestive because that kitchen sink right there was luminol tested, and obviously somebody washed off blood. Luminol reacts with blood. It's a chemical that if you spray it, it reacts with the blood, and then you put an ultraviolet light on it, it lights up blue. Next, hair. Very interesting. She found a hair in the sink of the downstairs bathroom, the main bathroom from the bedroom down there, the Haysom's bedroom, and it does not belong to either one of the victims. Here's a sketch. You can see this is the bedroom. If you look at the bottom right, that's where you enter the bedroom, and then you can see the bed. You walk around the bed, and then you enter the bathroom, right? And there on the sink is where they found it. Here's a picture of the sink. It was found on the right-hand sink, and you can see the bloody footprints right in front of the sink. So somebody obviously washed off blood there, right? And then in this bloody sink, there's a hair that does not belong to either one of the victims. This suggests that it was left at the time of the crime. It may belong to a perpetrator, because it's not the victims. Who else is it going to belong to? The shower was also luminol tested. It also lit up blue. That's going to become important later. On October 6th, for the very first time, the police finally talked to me, which I think is one of the biggest lapses on this part of the police, this whole thing. They should have questioned me immediately back in April. Finally, in October, they get around to talking to me. I was kind of like that. I was a nerd. I was kind of like Sheldon Cooper. I was about as uncool as you can get. And the police asked me about the mileage on the rental car, which matched precisely the drive from where Elizabeth and I spent the weekend in Washington to Lynchburg and back. And I had no explanation for that. I came up with a really stupid lie that we lost our way. Made no sense whatsoever. The mileage matches exactly. I know, and you know, that rental car made that trip. I could not explain that away. They wanted me to give fingerprints, blood samples, and footprints. I didn't want to. I thought they were onto us. We left together on October 12th and 13th. We took a flight going out of the country. November 18th, Mary Jane Burton again submits a report saying that Elizabeth's blood type is type B. So that matches that blood stain in the kitchen, which is near Nancy Haysom on that rag. But 10% of the population have blood type B, Virginia back then had a population of, I believe, 6 million back then. So that would be 600,000 people in Virginia with blood type B, right? Doesn't mean a heck of a lot. In early April 1986, this is what turned the case for me. This is what destroyed my life. Chuck Reed quits. Takes a job as a truck driver, because back then, truck drivers earned more money than lead detectives, right? That's him years later. We're friends now. I'm friends with his wife. Yeah. If he had stayed a cop, I wouldn't be here today. I might be sitting over there. The case was taken over by this man, Ricky Gardner, his trainee. There he is. He made a big career out of this. Became number 2 at the sheriff's. 3 weeks after Chuck Reed quit, Elizabeth and I are arrested on the run in England. That's a picture of London, in case you don't know what it looks like. We were doing check frauds at Marks and Spencer. Small-time stuff. Police caught us, brought us to the police station. This police station is now a pizza parlor. You can go there and have a pizza, where I was interrogated. Possibly in the cell where I was kept overnight. They found in our stuff this, a diary. And in this diary, there's an entry on October 12th, in Elizabeth's handwriting, the case is about to be solved, perhaps fingerprints on coffee mug used by Jens in Bedford interview gave him away. Remember back in October, they had questioned me, and I couldn't explain the mileage discrepancy, and we left a week later. And now this is in the diary. Right? Pretty damn suspicious. Points the finger at me for sure. Ricky Gardner comes over about a month after I'm arrested, from June 5th to 8th. There he is. And he interrogates me for 4 days, 16 hours, 7 sessions. Assisting him is Kenneth Beaver, older of 2 British detectives, and Terry Wright, the younger of 2 British detectives. They were not assigned to the case. Lawyers in the room will know this. British police officers cannot work on American cases. It's a different jurisdiction. They were only allowed to assist Ricky, right? It was his investigation. He also said that at my trial. This is sometimes misrepresented by people who want to sell books. June the 5th, first day of interrogation. There I am, looking sexy, right? The police asked me 4 times to say that I did something at the crime scene. 4 times I refused to answer. On the first day of the interrogation, right, the only thing I say is that I am at the crime scene, but 4 times I refuse to say that I did anything. I've been told by German lawyers that in Germany that would not suffice to indict somebody because no action was confessed. No crime was confessed, other than possibly being at the scene of the crime, and then you should have reported that. But that's a misdemeanor, and yeah. I did not admit doing anything on the first day. Second day, question, nothing said of any significance. Third day, there I am again. The older British police officer asks me, would you consider pleading guilty to something you didn't do? And I say, I can see it happening, yes. I think it's a possibility. I think it happens in real life. That might have made somebody suspicious that maybe I'm getting ready to lie. You now know in this room that 25% of all wrongful convictions are based on false confessions. There's studies on this from the United States. False confessions happen all the time. They're much more common than people think. Back then, this is 1986, people did not know this. So, to some extent, you can excuse Ken Beaver, that's the cop's name, for not knowing this. But today, everybody in this room knows, or should know, false confessions are fairly common. There's a second leading cause of wrongful convictions after false eyewitness identifications. June the 8th, there I am. I spill the beans. I tell the cops I did it, and clearly my confession has some accurate details, knowledge of the crime scene. I correctly say that the victims had severe injuries to their throats. You can see it on the photos. That's one, right, that's, I don't know which one that is. Okay, that's Nancy Haysom, that's Derek Haysom. Obviously, I got the injuries correct, right? I also told the cops that I cut my hand and bled at the crime scene, and that would match the type O blood at the door, right? Remember? There was type O blood at the door? That would be my blood type. 45% of the population has type O blood, so it's the most common blood type there is. Still, it matches, right? And then I said that this all started, the homicides occurred in the dining room, right? And there's a lot of blood on the floor in the dining room, which would tend to, again, confirm the accuracy of my confession. I also draw a sketch of where the bodies were, and it is generally accurate. There's some mistakes, okay? I've got Nancy Haysom on the left-hand side in two different directions, and Derek Haysom is in the wrong position at the door. But you could say close enough, right? I didn't put them in the bedroom. I put them in generally the right place, right? Possible errors in my confession. I said Nancy Haysom was wearing jeans. She was not. And I supposedly spent half an hour to 45 minutes, so I would what the victims were wearing. I said that there was a brutal fight between three people in the dining room. Lengthy, right? Can that be? Please take a look. Candlesticks are still standing. Wine glass is still standing, and the greeting cards are still standing on the mantelpiece. So these are things that might make you doubt the accuracy of my confession. Beyond that, there's the forensic evidence. And now we get to the important stuff. Blood groups. I told the story of three people, myself as perpetrator, and then two victims. That's three people. Mary Jane Burton found 4 blood groups, A, AB, B, and O. Doesn't match. Should have raised some questions. Blood in the shower. I never said anything about taking a shower after committing the crime, but clearly somebody did, right? Blood in the getaway car. There was none. We talked about this earlier. Even though I said specifically twice, right, there and there, that I cut my hand and bled heavily in the car. And Elizabeth said at my trial, and at her trial as well, that I grew up in front of a movie theater in Washington, and I was covered in blood from head to toe. I was also supposed to be naked and wrapped in a bed sheet. Doesn't match what Sylvia Moore said about the car being spotless. And of course, the police knew that there was a luminol test. We didn't find this out until much later, but while I was being interrogated, the police officer, Ricky Gardner, knew that a luminol test had been conducted by Chuck Reed, and that the story that I was telling really couldn't be true, because there was no blood in the getaway car. June 13th, 5 days after I give my confession, I am indicted for capital murder, which back then meant the electric chair in Virginia, right? And the police stopped investigating. That's not so different here in your country, or for that matter in my country. Once you're indicted, once the prosecution says that's the one, right? The police, their job is done. They just gather more evidence to help the prosecutor, but they're no longer investigating openly, right? It's no longer an undecided case. It becomes about winning the conviction, right? That he did no other forensic work at all or any other kind of investigation after June the 13th, 1986, even though there were some legitimate questions about the accuracy of my confession. And the day before I gave it, I said I would consider pleading guilty to something I didn't do. Autumn 1986. Again, to remind everybody, they're trying to kill me in this thing. 3,500 volts, 15 seconds. Your eyeballs pop out of your head, you bite your tongue off, there's blood everywhere. Executing somebody in an electric chair is not fun. I didn't want to die. My lawyers told me I needed to get my charges reduced from capital murder to manslaughter during the extradition. They told me I had to repeat everything I told the police to Dr. John Hamilton and Dr. Henrietta Bullard to get them to say this. You see it right here, not guilty to murder, but guilty of manslaughter. I did not want to die. I repeated my confession to the psychiatrists. It did not work. The British courts said they are not interested. Let the Americans decide whether it's murder or manslaughter. We're not going to decide this here in England. We're just extraditing you. December 30th, the second attempt to save my life. There I am, not looking happy. This is a letter in German from my German attorney, but he's also in the Netflix series, confirming this again, right? I the confession again for a German prosecutor so that Germany could extradite me from England to Germany and put me on trial there. The German prosecutor had no evidence. The American authorities would not give the German prosecutor the confession I had given to the American investigator, Ricky Gardner. So a German prosecutor came to England and I had to repeat the whole story all over again. So by now I've repeated my confession 3 times. 1 original and 3 repetitions, right? 2 psychiatrists and 1 German prosecutor. October 6th, Elizabeth is sentenced to 90 years in prison. She pleads guilty to murder and adds the phrase that as an accessory, but it's in the trial transcript that has no legal significance. Murder, accessory, conspiracy. It's all the same paragraph. You plead guilty, that's it. So, she says she just instigated it. She talked me into it, right? But she was not at the crime scene. One of her half-brothers, Dr. Howard Haysom, and her mother's best friend, Annie Haysom, say in court that they do not believe this. They do not think that that's what happened. Judge Sweeney, William Sweeney, does not let them explain why. He stops them before they can explain why this is not true. It's clearly not true based on the forensics. They figured it out. This is in 1987. This is before my trial. It was already clear that my confession is not true to Dr. Howard Haysom and Anne Massey. But Judge Sweeney would not let them explain why, and Elizabeth very happily goes off without the electric chair, without life sentences, just with 90 years. June 8th, 1989, Virginia introduces DNA at around this time, DNA testing. This man, Elmer Gist, one of the worst human beings ever allowed to walk around this planet, in my opinion, files a forensic report in which he says that the type O blood samples no longer existed. They could not be DNA tested, is what he claimed, right? This is from his forensic report, and then he repeats it 1 year later at my trial. It's a complete lie. It's a complete and total lie. The man just committed perjury. The blood O samples did exist. We didn't find out for another 19 years after my trial, which is why I'm not very happy with Elmer Gist. In 1989, the European Court of Human Rights rules on my case that I cannot be extradited as long as I'm facing inhumane or degrading treatment in the United States. So the charges are downgraded from capital murder to first-degree murder. I'm no longer facing the electric chair, right? Changed international law was obviously not me, but my lawyer's work that changed international law. From then on, people cannot be extradited from Europe to the US to be executed. That's where your interest originally stemmed from in me. I am sent back on January 12th on first-degree murder charges. On February 8th, my good friend Elmer Gist files 2 reports. The hair in the sink is not mine. It's not the victim's either. That's the bloody sink. Somebody washed off blood in that sink. It wasn't me. It wasn't the victim's. Very strange. Wonder whose hair that might be. And I have type O blood, which matches the blood on the door. There's also one spot in the bedroom. February 13th, this man, Robin Young, fingerprint expert, who found Elizabeth's fingerprints on the vodka bottle. There are glasses in that liquor cabinet, which have Derek fingerprints on it, Derek Haysom's fingerprints, and on the other side, unidentified fingerprints. And they were expecting those to be mine. They're not mine. Very strange, very peculiar. Even though I spent so much time at the house. They don't have anything of mine that links me to the crime scene. It's shortly before trial. They spent 4 years extraditing me. But they got no fingerprints, and they got no hair. And the blood group is shared by 45% of the population. The police gets nervous. What do? May 10th, they take fingerprints from Annie Massey. Because remember, the original crime scene profile said female perpetrator in a close relationship with victims. Could be Annie Massey too, right? She's eliminated from the fingerprints. Those are not hers either on those glasses. Open question. Those fingerprints are unidentified to this day. They were tested again in 2014. Nobody knows whose fingerprints they are. Then my trial starts from June 1st to June 21st, 1990. My trial was a 3-week trial. It was a big sensation in this little town. They had cameras. It was the first trial in Virginia and only the second trial nationwide ever to be televised. There was a guy, this guy, who was selling a book on the courthouse steps while my trial was going on, in which he proclaimed me guilty beyond reason. Here you go, the whole thing on videotape. Before my trial, Judge Sweeney, turns out that he was a friend of the Haysom family for 40 years, right? That happens. That's not that unusual that a trial judge will have some connection with the victims, right? But he was a friend of the victim's family for 40 years, but that's not the big problem. The problem is he gave an interview to this reporter, Amy Lemley, in which he said that he thinks Elizabeth was shocked I took the dare and killed her parents. So he's expressing his belief that I committed the crime before my trial. In Virginia, that's okay, by the way. Judges get to decide whether they're biased or not. My attorney, Richard Neaton, after my trial, I filed charges against him at the Bar Association. His license is suspended. He's found guilty on 4 of 6 charges for mistakes he made on my case. He loses his license for being so incompetent. That's the guy who defended me at my trial. His defense was that his ability to practice law was materially impaired by an emotional or mental disability at the time he was representing me. So, that's a euphemism for, okay? Everybody got that? Do I need to explain it? June 4th, prosecution's got a big problem they try to solve before the trial even starts. This is a pre-trial hearing. Trial started on June 1st with jury selection. June 4th, pre-trial hearing on the sock print. Remember, the sock print was supposed to be size 5 to 6 man's shoe size. I'm size 8.5. That's a problem. My foot is too long. Looks like it, it's too long. This guy is brought in. The forensic scientist, Rick Johnson, who filed this report, is never heard of again. You never see this guy again. They replace him with this guy, Robert Hallett, who's supposed to explain away the size difference. But the judge said he's not allowed to give his opinion, his expert opinion, because he's not ruled to be an expert. He can not only state facts, but not opinions. Later in the trial, the judge allows him to do that anyway. But that's the pretrial ruling. June the 6th, Terry Wright, one of the British cops who interrogated me, reads letters from Elizabeth to me. This is what the letters looked like. Would it be possible to hypnotize my parents, do voodoo on them, will them to death? I write, by the way, were I to meet your parents, I have the ultimate, quote unquote, weapon. I have not explored the side of me that wishes to crush to any real extent. I have yet to kill, possibly the ultimate act of crushing. My God, how I've got the dinner scene planned out. And of course, remember, there's a lot of blood on the floor in the dining room. That's why these letters were read. But remember, they were written 3.5 months before the crime. Still, very incriminating. June the 8th, a man called Donald Harrington testifies. I don't have a photo of him, but this is his testimony. He says that he saw me at the funeral service of Derek and Nancy Haysom with black eye and bruises on me, on my left cheek, and I also had bandaged fingers, which would make me look pretty guilty. June the 12th. Remember, there's type B blood, illegal type at the crime scene. This is a problem for the prosecution because I told them a story with 3 people in it, and they found 4 blood types. They got to explain away the type B blood, which is on that rag on the washer. Mary Jane Burton testifies, well, you know, maybe the A factor washed out, leaving only the B, right? Could have happened, maybe. What you have to know is, in the meantime, Mary Jane Burton has been outed as a serial liar. There's a podcast about this woman called Admissible Shreds of Evidence. Somebody else at the lab explained about how she's continually lied to help the prosecution for decades. There's a whole long podcast on this woman. She's a really bad egg, and it's a podcast worth listening to. June the 13th, the next day, my lawyer actually gets her to admit that this is nonsense. She testified under oath when she originally conducted the testing that it was type B blood, and there's no reason to doubt those test results. Also on June 13th, Robert Hallett starts testifying about the sock print. He takes a footprint of mine and lays it over a sock print. Apples and oranges, right? But still, that's what he does. That's him doing this. That's a picture of a footprint on top of a sock print, and you can see the little red arrows. And he explains away the difference in the length by saying that there was a double impression at the heel. That's an opinion. The judge earlier ruled that he's not allowed to do that, but he lets him get away with it anyway. Possibly because the judge already thinks I'm guilty. Anyway, that's his explanation for the size difference. It's about a centimeter size difference between my foot, the barefoot impression, and the sock print at the crime scene. June the 14th, Elizabeth testifies. Of course, she says I did it. But she also testified about that diary entry on October 12th about my fingerprints on the coffee cup. Remember that? Maybe the fingerprints on the coffee cup used by Jens in the interview gave him away. She testified, she wrote that specifically to deceive me. So it's a lie, right? It had made me look guilty back then, but now she's admitting it's a lie. And in fact, most of what she wrote in that diary is a lie. She also wrote about laser surgeries and IRA terrorists and all other kinds of stuff. But what had made me look so suspicious at first to Terry Wright when he first arrested us turns out to be not true. And she also has to admit on the stand that at one point she actually confessed. I have the audio recording of her confession. I didn't bring it today, but I actually have the audio recording of her saying, I did it myself, I got off on it. And then Ken Bieber asks her, what does that mean? And she says, I was only being facetious. Now, you can believe that if you want, or maybe not. June the 15th, right there is Christine Kim. That's Elizabeth's college roommate. She's allowed to give a written statement saying that she doesn't remember any injuries on me. And remember, Donald Harrington had said that I was standing next to Christine Kim when he observed these injuries on me. He said I was standing next to an Asian girl. That's her, right? She says that she does not remember whether or not I had injuries. There's a lot more coming on this. At that time, we were living, all of us, the 3 of us, Christine, Elizabeth, and me, at Annie Massey's house with all of her family for about 4 days, I think. She was there. Her husband was there. Dr. Howard Haysom was there. Another brother, Richard Haysom, was there. And of course, at the funeral itself, there were cops like Ricky Gardner. Nobody else saw the injuries on me. Nobody else saw the injuries on me. Only the one guy, Donald Harrington. June the 18th, I testify. I say that I was in Washington, D.C. while Elizabeth was off killing her parents, and I did not know about it. She returns and tells me I killed my parents. The drugs made me do it. They deserved it anyway, which is a reference to something we'll get to later, sexual abuse, and that I've got to save her life because otherwise they will fry her. And I have this brainstorm, and I say, I will take the rap for you. Like Sidney Carton in A Tale of Two Cities. Has anybody read that? Anybody still read nowadays? Apparently not. This is a novel that they used to make people like me read in school and college. I guess they don't do that anymore. Sidney Carton goes to the guillotines during the French Revolution, sacrifices his own life for Lucy Manet, the woman he loves. I thought that was me. I was going to do this, right? Pleading guilty to something you didn't do, like in the June 7th interrogation, right? My father was a German diplomat. I had my own diplomatic passport. I had my own diplomatic identity card. My car had diplomatic driver's license plates. I thought I had not diplomatic immunity, that no longer existed, but diplomatic protection. I thought I would be sent to Germany and imprisoned there under German law for 5 years. I would get a 10-year sentence and I would actually spend 5 years in prison and 5 years of my freedom to save Elizabeth's life. Because after all, she was supposed to be executed. That's me. Here we go. I said, by the way, were I to meet your parents, I have the ultimate weapon. The complete quote goes on to say, I believe I would make them either completely lose their wits, get heart attacks, or they would become lovers in an agape kind of way of the rest of the world. That's the actual letter. So, it was not actually about murdering anybody. It was teenage BS. It was not a murder plan. Love is a form of meditation and the ultimate weapon against your parents. That was the ultimate weapon against her parents. It was love. That's from the original letter. Remember this? I have not yet explored the side of me that wishes to kill. I have yet to crush. I have yet to kill, possibly the ultimate act of crushing. The same letter starts by saying, I just got through reading 2 excellent articles on World War II in the German magazine Der Spiegel. There's the quote from the letter. I actually found this magazine after my release. That is the magazine. That's an excerpt from the article. He's talking about every man is a potential war criminal. And in my letter, right, I quote this article, right, and I write, I find this thought so overwhelmingly horrible, it's hard to describe. So, contrary to the impression created by taking an excerpt of that letter, I was actually expressing my horror at that thought. And the crushing comes from a novel by George Orwell called 1984. He wrote, if you want a vision of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a face forever, right? And I actually refer to Orwell in this letter. Crush and Orwell, you see it highlighted there. So the whole excerpt about me wanting to crush somebody and kill somebody is actually about a newspaper article, a magazine article, and it refers to George Orwell. It has nothing to do with the crime. The last reference to the Haysoms was 11 days prior in my letters. This is just something they took out of context to convict me, right? I also wrote, my God, I've got the dinner scene planned out. I thought I was going to meet her parents at dinner, like every boyfriend meets his girlfriend's parents at some stage. I ended up meeting them at lunch, not at dinner. And the dinner scene just wasn't correct. Again, the cards are on the mantle, the glasses and the wine candlesticks are still standing on the table. There's not a lot of blood on the chair seats. Something happened in the dining room, but it was not a 3-way fight the way I described in my confession. Nancy Haysom was clearly killed in the kitchen, right? Clearly killed there, not in the dining room. And Derek Haysom was found in the living room, not in the dining room. June 21st, my lawyer gives a summary of the defense's case. He points out that they failed to do any investigation after I was indicted. They never found out whose fingerprints those are in the glasses. They never found out whose hair that is in the bloody sink, because it was supposedly never compared to Elizabeth. That shoe print is much too small to be mine. It was supposed to belong to a woman, size 8, or a small boy, right? It doesn't fit me. This thing can only be explained away with his theory of a double impression, which should have never been allowed in court, says my lawyer. And of course, there's this incident where Elizabeth compared her foot to the sock print at the crime scene. And there's her blood type on the rag and her confession. I did it myself, I got off on it. That's the defense's case. The prosecutor says Jens Soering said he injured his hand at the crime scene, bled heavily at the crime scene, and there's type O blood at the crime scene. I think he repeated the type O blood 21 times or 23 times. So that matches. He said that Bob Hallett, the sock print witness, designated the footprint as his, and it matches and fits like a glove. Does anybody remember the O.J. Simpson trial? Probably. This is all way before your time. The thing with the glove is from the O.J. Simpson trial. Never mind. Y'all are just too young for this. It's okay. O.J. Simpson is not an important person, and frankly, neither am I. This is the prosecutor's explanation for the hair in the sink, why they never compared it. Look at this. I don't know. We wanted the footprint. That's his entire explanation for why they never compared the hair in the sink to Elizabeth. June 21st, I am convicted and sentenced to 2 life sentences to be served consecutively, one after the other. I'm taken out of the court, put in the sheriff's car, driven away to prison. Next, well, basically 30 years. The next day after the trial, a newspaper article is published. A juror says that initially the jury was split 6-6. That's a not guilty in America. You need just one dissenting juror. Initially the jury is split 6-6, 6 guilty, 6 not guilty, and he me because of the sock print evidence. Mid-September, my lawyer, the guy who lost his license later on for being such a not so good lawyer, finally looks at all of the footprints in the file and discovers this footprint of Elizabeth's. This is what Robert Hallett showed the jury, right? An overlay of these two. They look very similar. The truth is, this footprint of Elizabeth's also resembles the sock print just as closely as mine does. And hers matches in length as well. Robert Hallett never showed this to the jury, even though it was the first footprint on that roll. It was the first footprint on that roll, and he never showed it to the jury. And my lawyer didn't find it until afterwards. 1995, 2 forensic scientists look at all this footprint mess, and he says the footprint matches in size only with Ms. Haysom, Elizabeth. There's no evidence that I was at the crime scene, and it should have never been used. Another expert says that it would have fit anybody with that approximate shoe size, and that Robert Hallett created a misleading impression of accuracy that just didn't exist. 2009, it's now 19 years after my trial, the Virginia Law Review publishes an article which later becomes really famous, standard study by this guy, Brandon Garrett. In it is Robert Hallett, the guy who testified at my trial, because another innocent man, Charles Fain, on death row for 17 years. This is from the other transcript from Charles Fain. He says the same things, double impression, right? Here again, transparencies, he uses that as well. And he uses the little red arrows, right? So he uses the same testimony in Charles Fain's trial as at mine, and puts him on death row for 17 years until he's released. He's exonerated. Mary Jane Burton, the one who had that podcast made about her, put Willie Davidson behind bars for, I believe it was 20 years innocent. So she's also responsible for a wrongful conviction. And Elmer Gist put Ed Honecker away, an innocent man. I think he was 11 years. In any case, 3 forensic scientists testified at my trial and put other innocent people in prison for decades. The only forensic scientist who testified at my trial who did not put an innocent man behind bars is this one, Robin Young, the fingerprint expert. September 24th, 2009, the Department of Forensic Sciences tests blood samples from the crime scene. automatically. I did not have to file for this. And my DNA is not found in any of the blood samples from the crime scene. That's all we know at this point. That'll change later. March 10th, 2011, this man, I'm going to skip this, I'm not going to go into this in great detail. He comes forward and says that 2 months after the crime, he saw Elizabeth Haysom with another car with a lot of blood in the footwell and a bloody hunting knife in the footwell of the car with another man who was definitely not me. It might have been a man called Ned Brinkley, he's not sure, but it was definitely Elizabeth and it was definitely not me, and the car had blood in the footwell and a bloody knife in it. 2011, June 26, 2011, that's when we find out about the FBI profile. October 30th, 2013, through this radio, we found out about the luminol test. All this is their suppressed evidence. In July 2016, this man, Andrew Griffiths, a high-ranking British, Dr. Andrew Griffiths actually, a high-ranking British police officer specializing in interrogation techniques, files a report saying that there are significant doubts about my confession for 2 reasons. Number 1, mistakes in the confession that the real killer wouldn't have made. Number 2, the British police violated the PACE Act, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, while conducting their interrogation. August 24th, my lawyer files a petition for an absolute pardon because finally, after all these years, of course, I'm in a prison cell all this time. I did not have access to my legal files. So I was never able to compare the DNA report from 2009 with the blood group report of 2016. I was never able to have both of these pieces of paper in my hand at the same time until the summer of 2016. And it turns out that 2 of the samples they tested were blood group O. My blood group, other DNA. One of them is that's 2FE, is on the handle of the door. It says Jens Soering and Elizabeth Haysom are eliminated as contributors. Of course, Elizabeth is eliminated because she doesn't have blood group O. Obviously, that's not her blood. But I'm the one who was always supposed to have left that blood group O blood at the crime scene. But it's got different DNA. This man, Elmer Gist, had lied back in 1989 when he filed this report saying that the samples no longer existed. 20 years later, the samples did exist. Man perjured himself. He's a very bad human being. The type B sample could not be DNA tested. This is from the report. It was not enough material left to DNA test. September 11th, 2016, so this would be like a little bit over 2 weeks after the pardon petition was filed, Elizabeth gives another newspaper interview saying that I'm guilty and she's a poor innocent victim. She says her mother sexually abused her for 8 years, and she lied about that at my trial. At my trial, she said that her mother did not sexually abuse her. Now that the DNA tests come out, all of a sudden, her mother did sexually abuse her. But she says this 26 years after my trial. This is Betty Lane Desportes. She's a lawyer, and she says that the DNA tests might not be accurate. Right? The blood samples might be contaminated or mixed. There might be skin cells in it. Reasonable objection. 2017, Dr. Moses Shanefield from George Washington University and Dr. Tom McClintock of Liberty University look at all of that, and they say, no, the samples are not contaminated. This is then again called into question after my release, and in 2022, Dr. McClintock goes back to the lab and actually looks at the raw data. This is actually new evidence. I filed a new pardon petition about this, which has not yet been decided on. It'll probably come next year. And this is not in the next Netflix series, so if you're wondering why this is new to you, he's really angry about this as well. I did an interview with him for my YouTube channel because he told Netflix all of this. It's definitely not a mixture. March 16th, 2018, this woman, Sandra Thornton, says that shortly after the Haysom murders, she was working at a homeless shelter, and there were 2 people there. And she overheard them saying that they had gone to a rich bitch's house to kill her parents. And a few days later, they committed a knife murder in Roanoke, which is the next town, right? This should have been turned over to the defense. This should have definitely been turned over to the defense because this was all reported to the Roanoke police, the Blacksburg police, right? July 11th, 2018, that shoe print, that's the one we know about. Remember, LR2. Size 8 woman or a small boy. We find another shoe print. Look at the tread pattern. This one and this one, different tread pattern. This is enhanced, digitally enhanced, and that's the other one digitally enhanced. This is them next to each other. Okay? The one in the middle and the one on the left is the one that we knew about, and the one on the right is the new one. So there's another sneaker print at the house that nobody has noticed until now, 28 years after my trial. Same day, this man, Chuck Reed, files a report saying that the witness who said he saw injuries on me lied. He said it's a total lie, what Donald Harrington said, because there was no report ever filed on this. Chuck Reed was not allowed in the courtroom. He didn't know about Donald Harrington's testimony. That's why he was not allowed in. Donald Harrington committed perjury. There were some cops working on my case, other cops. This is some of their files. They actually tracked down 2 college students. One on the left is now a lawyer. Her first name is also Elizabeth. The one on the right is now a doctor, first name John. And we can prove that they definitely saw me directly after the homicides. And both the attorney and the doctor now say I definitely had no injuries. They have a clear memory of me having no injuries. None of this can be introduced in Virginia because of the 21-day rule. That only Virginia has this. The court loses jurisdiction of the case 21 days after trial, which means you can never submit new evidence in Virginia. 21 days after your sentencing, you can never, ever submit new evidence. This is well known. The Washington Post, every few years, writes another editorial about it. Virginia is not changing this. They like finality of judgment. Who supported my pardon petition? The original lead investigator, Chuck Reed, Sheriff Chip Harding, Detective Sergeant Richard Hudson, FBI agent Stan Lapicus, Professor, my God, I've just blanked on her, Mary Kelly Tate, from the University of Richmond Law School, where she leads the Institute for Actual Innocence, which focuses on wrongful convictions. Irwin Cotler, he was a former Minister of Canada, former Deputy Attorney General Gail Starling Marshall, Irwin Cotler, founder of the Innocence Project in New York, and John Grisham, who is one of the major board members, bankrolls the Innocence Project in New York. They all support my pardon petition, which I do not get. On November 25th, 2019, the Department of Corrections Parole Board says my petition for an absolute pardon is denied, but they're going to release me on parole, which is kind of weird because hardly anybody gets out on parole in Virginia. Very, very rarely. They say I'm no longer a danger to society, plus they like to save money by releasing me. Let's look at that. No danger, but I also showed no remorse. I continually proclaimed my innocence. I denied my guilt. That's no remorse. And you have to show remorse to get parole. That's in your country as well. It's also in my country. You cannot get parole until you show remorse. And the same in Virginia, yet they paroled me. Cost savings. There are 4,193 lifers in Virginia, right? The only one they decided to save money on was the one who said he was innocent, right? The other 4,193 lifers, they all get to stay in prison. Virginia's parole rate is 2 to 3%. And they only spend $21,000 per year per inmate. How much money are they really going to save by releasing me? The money they actually did save is by not declaring me innocent. Because if I had been declared innocent, I would have gotten $46,000 a year, which ends up being about $1.5 million. That's where the money savings is, right? So that kind of shows that the Virginia Parole Board's ruling on this is at least open to question. Okay, we're going to skip, let's not skip over it. Governor Northam praised himself for granting 1,200 pardons. These were, however, only restoration of rights pardons. This is for people who have already been released, whom he then allowed to go vote again. Actual pardons, real pardons for people who were in prison for a long time, he only granted 8. That's about 2 per year. And I was not one of the 2 per year. There are other people he also did not pardon. This is Darnell Phillips, who was released on parole, just like me. He was after decades in prison for a rape. The rape victim in his case says he didn't do it and begged the governor to release him with a pardon. The governor didn't do it, released him on parole, even though the victim in his case said, he's definitely not the guy. I made a mistake. That's the way it works. This is a common phenomenon in the United States. Unfortunately, there's articles about this. Very often, they will release victims of wrongful convictions, here you go, on parole or through something called an Alford plea to avoid admitting a mistake and to avoid paying compensation. On December 17th, 2019, I was then actually deported to Germany. That's me coming out of the plane. There was a lot of reporters at the airport. It was a pretty good day. After 33 years, 6 months, and 25 days behind bars. That's what I looked like when I was convicted. That's what I looked like when I was arrested. And that's what I looked like when I was in Germany for the last time prior to that. I'm the one on the left, the one without the weapon. That's it. If y'all got some questions, I'm ready. We're not going to use this in the recording, so don't worry, your faces will not be shown and no one will hear your voices, okay? No.